This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. You don't have to live in Los Angeles or New York to make movies. You can do that in places like Atlanta, Toronto, or even right here in Connecticut. TJ Noel-Sullivan is one of the people doing just that. The Connecticut native lived in Los Angeles for a bit after graduating from the Yale Film and Media Studies program, but he returned home to Hartford to tell a story that could only be set in the insurance capital of the world. His new film, Midas, is an epic heist about three friends attempting to pull off an insurance fraud scheme.
I made $80 in tips today. What's this?
Bill from today.
I need you guys' help with something.
You're talking about insurance fraud. I'm sorry.
You told him what?
Ricky actually just graduated from Harvard.
What was your major?
Excuse me?
Welcome to claims.
Could you elaborate on what we do?
Experimental treatments can range anywhere from, $100K to $1 million.
This is different than faking a resume or lying what school you went to. This is a real crime. You'd go to jail.
That was from the trailer of TJ's new movie, Midas, and it sounds super exciting. Today, TJ joins us to talk about the film, his love of Hartford, and making the city he loves the next Hollywood. TJ, welcome to Where We Live today.
Thank you so much for having me.
And for our listeners, you can also join the conversation. Let us know if you have any questions, 888-720-9677, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. So before we get into the film, we'd love to just get to know you a little bit. Give us some of your history, your background, and how did you first get into filmmaking?
Sure. So I'm born and raised here in Hartford. I went to Classical Magnet, which is actually right across the street from the Where We Live studios. And in high school, I went to this high school apprenticeship program called the Ion Video program at Real Art Ways. And it was my first exposure to filmmaking and really sparked an interest for me that led to me studying it in college and put me down this path where 9 years later, I am back at Real Art Ways showing my first feature film.
Well, I'm loving the full circle, and I think that's something that we'll be following throughout this conversation. What was it about filmmaking that drew you in?
I think the power of storytelling is so important, and I remember making my first short film in that program, which, I don't think ever will see the light of day again, but the idea that I could write on a piece of paper these thoughts and ideas and then turn them into a moving image and the power that could have on an audience, I think is what really attracted me to it. I've always been somebody that wants to, make a difference in the world, and I think for me, storytelling and filmmaking is a way to do that.
Was there a particular film growing up, or do you have a moment, maybe many moments, like moving images that really drew you in too?
Yeah, so one of my favorite movies growing up that, anytime it was on the TV, my parents would turn up the volume was Ocean's 11, which I think...
Well, that makes sense.
...was definitely an inspiration for Midas. But yeah, there have been so many movies, and Whiplash, I think, was really a key, pivotal one for me in my artistic journey and kind of deciding what I wanted to do as an artist. But yeah, I'm such a big fan of movies, and I love that part of my job is getting to watch movies as well.
And I think that was also part of your school life too, right? Did you have friends that were really into that culture as well?
Yeah, we joked that, all of our friends that studied like computer science would be doing problem sets at a Thursday night. We'd be like, okay, well, we're watching the movie for our homework. Does anyone want to come join us in doing our homework?
Nice.
And that's a really fun plug for why you should study film.
And there you go. It opens up so many different opportunities, right? And speaking of opportunities, after graduating in 2020, you had a lot of options, a lot of career options, and you ended up in LA, but you came back to Hartford, obviously. So tell us about that story.
Yeah, so first of all, 2020 was a weird time to graduate.
Slightly.
And was kind of trying to figure out what made sense, and was fortunate enough to get a job offer to go work at Mattel Films. And it was, a great time to be there. Barbie was happening. A lot of other cool projects were happening. And really, I kind of went out there. I was told, you got to go out there and kind of learn about the business and the industry and all that. And so I took that opportunity. I went out there. I did my year out there and learned so much. And finally got to the point where I said, okay, I feel like I've learned what I needed to know, the things I didn't know. And now I'm ready to make my first feature. And that was what really sparked the opportunity to come back here and shoot Midas. And I think that overall, I'm very grateful for the time that I had at Mattel, but also realized that I wanted to be telling stories that were more local to my community, and the opportunity to do that was clear with Midas.
And I mean, nothing like learning the craft and one of the ground zeros, right, of filmmaking. And I think you're sort of on this journey of rethinking how we see locations and where films should be made or are made. And so can you talk about, are there things, or what does Connecticut offer to aspiring filmmakers that maybe the bigger film hubs don't have?
Yeah, I mean, the number one thing that I say to anybody that's ever asked me about making a film in Hartford or in Connecticut generally is the reception and the community support you receive here. And so there's kind of a running joke in New York or LA, if you walk into a restaurant and say, hey, we're interested in filming here, they'll pull out a card and say, okay, here's our agent. You can talk with them about filming here. Versus here in Hartford and throughout Connecticut, I think people are so much more excited about movies. People want to support movies being made here because I think people realize that so much of our perception of a city is what we see on the screen, whether that's, the nightly news or on a movie screen. Think about why you might think New York or LA is so glamorous, and it's oftentimes because the way it was shot in a movie. And so I think people understood that that's what we were trying to do with Midas, and were really receptive to trying to help however they could, whether that was letting us film in a location or providing us catering or anything like that. And so one of the big things I really say is the community support here is just unmatched, especially, for me being a hometown kid and a local product. I think people were really excited to get on board and be supportive. And you really can, especially in a post-COVID world where it's not, things are happening over Zoom. You don't need to be able to go take a coffee in LA. In fact, people in LA go, oh, the traffic's so bad, let's take a Zoom meeting anyway.
Right. I get that. As a Los Angeles native, traffic is never, the joke is always, it's about 20 minutes to everywhere, but it's really an hour. Like, let's be real here. And I want to talk about location as a character, because Hartford certainly was one of the main characters in your film. But before we get there, we'd love to have you sort of share with us, your first feature film is Midas. How did you first get the idea to do this film?
Yeah, so I had the idea for this film way back in 2018. I had this idea for a heist film that takes a turn, and I don't want to spoil anything for listeners, but Midas is the first 2/3 of the movie is a pretty standard heist movie, and then kind of things take a twist. And I had an idea for that, and had really been playing with what that looked like, and had kind of written out different outlines and things like that. And initially, Midas was going to be a tech company or some other sort of company. And it was really in 2020, as I was sitting around with COVID and had lots of time on my hands, I was talking to a mentor and said, I have this idea for a heist movie, and I think it might be the right first project. And I think I want to shoot it in Hartford because, the community support here is really going to be so key in getting this made. And he said to me, well, why is it set in Hartford? And I said, well, I just explained like the community support. He's like, no, that's why you're going to shoot it in Hartford. But why is it set in Hartford? And that was kind of the light bulb moment for me where I said, oh, if it's set in Hartford, they're not robbing a tech company. They're robbing a health insurance company. And from that, everything kind of fell into place of the reasoning is his mom has been denied coverage, and everything suddenly clicked. And so I had that conversation that night. I wrote out the full outline for the film. And then over the next 3 days, because with COVID, I had nothing to do, I wrote the full draft of the first draft. And obviously, there were plenty of revisions beyond that. But honestly, I went back and looked, and that first draft is pretty similar to, the shooting script. The characters are the same. The overall structure is the same. And so it was kind of this light bulb moment of, I realized, if I'm shooting it in Hartford, then the mark would be a health insurance company because of Hartford's history.
Right. And I think that's so fascinating because it's such a characteristic of the city, right? And there's so much history behind that. I mean, when I moved to Connecticut, I had no idea that Hartford was the insurance capital of the world. So I imagine if you watch Midas for the first time, or if you, if this is the first time you're being introduced to Hartford, like what a great way, right? Yeah. to show people what Hartford's about. And you can really feel the love that you have for Hartford in this movie. I watched it and I thought it was just so gorgeously filmed. What was it like shooting in Hartford? I know you mentioned community support was a huge part of this.
Yeah, I mean, first I have to say, the beauty of the film, really the credit's given to our cinematographer, Mike Curry, and the team that kind of made that happen because, I have some camera skills, but definitely not the skills necessary to portray the film or portray the city so beautifully. But I think the other key thing with Hartford was, as we were location scouting, oftentimes if you're location scouting in a different city, you'll have a location scout, they'll bring you into a bakery and say, okay, this is the bakery that's willing to let us film here. And you have 10 minutes essentially to kind of get to know the feel of the bakery and say, oh, this is a right fit or not. And because I grew up here and, born and raised and been all over the city, as I was writing the film, I was thinking about locations and knew, the difference in locations. So for example, the very first scene of the film takes place at a Jamaican bakery. I was like, okay, I know the difference between Scotch Jamaican Bakery and Golden Crest Bakery. And let me make the decision now as I'm writing the script about which is the best location here. And so I think that was a really cool opportunity. Was I really knew all of these locations really well. I knew what their essence was before we went to go location scout them. And we got fortunate that, just about every location we approached and said, hey, we'd like to film here, welcomed us with open arms. But that was, I think, a really key part of being able to capture the city. Was I knew going in the places that I wanted to capture and what they were, what their true essence was.
And how did you choose the locations? Because it sounds like from your process, it happened rather organically as you're writing the show or writing the movie, and because you know the area so well. But were there any deliberate choices when you were thinking, oh, I want this to be featured, I want that to be featured? And something that I really loved about the film is it kind of, no spoilers here, but it kind of opens with these sort of slow moving images, and the focuses were on these shops, so you really get a feel of these places.
Yeah, I mean, that the opening montage, from the very beginning had this idea of an opening montage that showcased the city and helped grounded us, right? One of the challenges that we had to be thinking about was I wanted to make a film that a Hartford audience or a local audience would immediately go, oh my God, I recognize that place, and get a lot of pride and joy out of, but also it needs to be a film that, can be shown nationwide, right? We opened up in 7 cities across the country, and it was important that it couldn't just be a film for local residents. It needed to be a film with national appeal or international appeal. And so finding that balance was really key. But opening the movie with this kind of montage that kind of helps set us and show us where in the city we are, where in the world we are. And for me, I say, as we were picking those locations, I just kind of picked some of my favorite places throughout the city. If a friend comes and says, hey, where should I go to eat? I was like, watch the first 5 minutes of Midas and you'll see all my favorite restaurants included there. And again, that went back to, I had these ideas in my head and wanted to also showcase the wide variety of what Hartford had to offer, right? And so those restaurants are in every neighborhood of Hartford, every type of cuisine, which I think is one of the things that makes Hartford so special, is that we have all these different incredible cuisines all scattered throughout the city. And so that was something I definitely wanted to showcase in the opening moments of the film, and had the opportunity, again, because these restaurants were so excited to help us out. And oftentimes, I think just about every restaurant that appears in the opening moments of the film also provided some of the catering for our cast and crew as we were filming, which was really cool.
Oh, that definitely adds to experience, right? And that's one of the things I really enjoy about Hartford is the diversity of cuisine, and talk about universal language, right? We all need to eat.
Yeah.
So what a great way to know a city is through its food. And you mentioned earlier too, us as a global audience, I think we've gotten to know cities like LA and New York from a lot of films and TV shows. I mean, I remember the first time landing on Times Square, and I was just in awe, because it's like, wow, this is a real place. And so, but so far we haven't really seen many movies or shows set in Hartford specifically. So what was it like introducing your audience to the city of Hartford, even your cast too, right? Maybe breaking some stereotypes, or maybe this whole thing is new for them.
Yeah, I mean, our 2 lead actors are from LA and never set foot in Hartford until about a week before shooting when we brought them in. And I kind of felt the responsibility of, they're portraying, Hartford locals. They're supposed to, in the film, have lived their whole life here. And so we kind of did a crash course in Hartford. I remember I picked them up from the airport, and we just kind of drove around for an hour through the different neighborhoods and kind of talked about what Hartford was. We went to Allegro's Cafe down in the South End and had a nice breakfast there. And really wanted to kind of expose them to the world of Hartford and get them a feel for what the city was. And they really embraced that. And I think, I give them a lot of credit for recognizing how important that could be, because, as an actor, you could just say, hey, I'm going to show up, do my work, and then on my free time, just, do whatever else I need to do. But they were really interested in, on weekends, we went to a Hartford athletic game and a Hartford yard goods game and the food truck festival and all these different things that I think gave them a better flavor for what Hartford is and helped them bring their characters to life. But that really took buy-in from our actors to make that happen.
And I wonder if that immersiveness helps sort of make the film more real? Because I see those iconic images. You know, one of the actors had a Yargoats shirt on, and someone else had a Weaver School shirt on. And to me, I wonder if there's a level of immersion, I think, that really makes it real for the audience. Certainly for me when I was watching it. And you know, we mentioned earlier that this is a film about a heist of an insurance company. You don't see that very often. So how did you approach researching the industry? Did you have any idea going in, or did you learn a lot? Because you really did an amazing job portraying the ins and outs of the industry.
You know, one of the fortunate things of making the movie here and being from here is I know plenty of people who work in the industry. And so I think I wrote the first draft and I highlighted specifically the script pages that were talking about the industry. And I sent them out to 5 or 6 people that I knew in the industry and said, hey, can you just read this and tell me, is there anything here that sounds unrealistic or doesn't work? And got some notes back of, hey, it wouldn't happen like this, maybe change this up. And so obviously one of the challenges is you have to balance, you know, the drama of a movie world and not get too bogged down in the bureaucracy of health insurance,
sure,
but also wanted to create a world that was believable. And especially I knew a lot of people that worked in the industry were eventually going to see this film. And so I didn't want to get hate mail in saying, this is totally unrealistic.
Right. I mean, it's sort of the balance between a caricature, right, and what we know or may not know about certain insurance workers. I did love the character Tom, who's a cousin, and Tom works in the insurance industry, and I'll let our listeners go and watch the movie and see what's up with Tom, because I thought he was a great portrayal of an insurance worker. And one of the things that really jumped out to us is the little details. And as you mentioned, you know, knowing people who work in the industry and you're able to sort of cross-check with them. We really love the fact that you included push notifications. Like, that was a nice touch. And also, one of the things that the main character, Ricky, comes back to a lot is he says, I'll improvise in the movie a bunch. And we know Hartford has a lot of great talent, but it doesn't have as many resources as, say, a place like LA and New York, of course, right? So were there a lot of challenges and opportunities when you were filming for improvisation, and what did that look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think the scariest thing going into production was there were pieces that we had not locked down, and we said, okay, in 2 weeks we're going to be filming the scene, and we haven't exactly figured where we're going to be filming it yet, or we don't know the extras, right? One of the really big things in the film, and in order to have the scale and feel like, you know, a high budget film, is you want to fill the room with extras, right? So there's a gala scene where we needed 200 people to come fill in you know, black tuxedo and dresses and all that. And we kind of took this gamble. We did not have those people signed up when we started filming, but I said, I have faith that if we put the word out and get the word out, that people will sign up. And I remember we put this Google form out and we're sharing it on Facebook and other social media and had people signing up slowly, but we weren't even close to them we needed. And we were just getting ready to panic. And the Hartford Current ran a story that said, nice, local movie looking for extras. And suddenly our form was overwhelmed. We actually had to turn some people away because we had so many people sign up.
Right.
And so that was one of those moments of, there definitely was some improvisation and some going in, not having things figured out, but going, okay, I think we'll make it work. But at the end of the day, it came back to, I knew we had the community support. And so I was like, with the community support, there's a lot of problems that can be solved.
Right. And then the improvisation wouldn't sound so quicksandy. It feels like you were running a little bit on quicksand. And for our listeners today, you've been listening to TJ Noel-Sullivan. He's a writer and director behind the new feature film Midas. And Midas was set and filmed in Hartford. We'll be continuing this conversation. Coming up next, we hear from one member of the cast. And let us know if you've seen this movie. Join the conversation, 888-720-9677, or leave us a comment on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. The new feature film Midas isn't your average heist film. Yes, it's action-packed like Ocean's 11 and The Italian Job, but it's also deeply human. The main character plans a heist with his friends to help pay for his mom's chemotherapy. And unlike those other heist movies, they're not stealing from a casino or a bank. Their target is a health insurance company. After all, It is set and filmed in Hartford. Some local actors were featured in the film, but the main cast was fairly new to the area. So part of their preparation for the film was simply getting to know Hartford. And with me today is TJ Noel-Sullivan, who wrote and directed Midas. And for our listeners, let us know if you have any questions, 888-720-9677, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. So TJ, we're going to hear from the cast in a little bit, but tell our listeners how you went about casting for the film, because you have some parts that were filled with local actors here in Hartford.
Yeah, so we initially were started off by casting the lead 5 roles, and we opened that up to a nationwide casting search through all the various casting pools, and we ended up getting over 5,000 self-tape auditions.
That's amazing.
Which is a lot of auditions.
That is a lot.
And we sifted through, I think I watched just about all 5,000 of those over the course of a week, and sifted through to our 120 so callbacks that we wanted to bring in. And so we did callback auditions with 120 actors, and then finally whittled that down to kind of our top group. And the last final step for us was doing chemistry reads. And so I think we had 2 or 3 favorite options from each role in a chemistry read, and we'd kind of pair them up and see how it worked. And for us, I remember when we did the chemistry read with Preet, Laquan, and Federico, they did the first read, and I was like, oh, that's it. Like they have the feeling of they are 3 best friends. And I say that I think we did a good job casting, because the 3 of them had never met each other before that chemistry read. And now 2 years later, they're still really, really good friends and have a group chat and are talking every day. And so I think we did a good job of casting them as 3 best friends.
Right.
But yeah, that was kind of a key piece of it. And so we, in that process though, had, we really pushed it locally, because we also wanted to give local talent opportunities. And so the actress that plays Claire, Lucy Powers, is a local actress. She's born and raised in Farmington, went to Greater Hartford Academy of the Arts, and does a lot of great work in New York and LA, but was really excited to be home and get to shoot this movie at home. And we also had a lot of, all of our supporting actors actually were local actors, some of whom, had auditioned for the lead roles, and we said, hey, we see the talent, but it's not, the right fit, whether for the chemistry reads or whatever that was, it's not the right fit. And so we want to offer you one of these other characters. And so we had a really great group that came together. And I think that's such a big piece of making a movie is finding the cast that both will believably, portray the characters and bring those characters to life. As a writer and director, it's really fun to have these characters that just live in your head for almost 2 years and finally get to see them be brought to life by real actors and what those actors bring to each character. But also I think the other really key piece is having actors that buy into what you're doing and want to be a part of that. And that was really key for us, was we had these actors who were really excited to be there. There were no egos. They really wanted to do what was best for the film.
Well, I think when you have good chemistry, it's like, I don't want to say it's half of the work, but it's a lot of the work already done for you, right? When they really connect. And I think the camera doesn't lie. You really see that chemistry flow through the lenses. And you talking about the buy-in, with the cast coming from outside of the city. You mentioned earlier that you drove around, got breakfast, and kind of checked out the city. But they also spent time with the community and talking with the locals while you were on set filming. So give us, what did that look like?
Yeah, I mean, Laquan especially, who's the lead actor in the film. Again, I think there's this stereotype that an actor comes in and they want to go to their trailer and they can maybe be a diva. And Laquan was absolutely the opposite of that. I remember we had multiple occasions where we'd be filming and we'd be like, all right, we're ready for Laquan. Where's Laquan? And a random passerby asked, hey, what's happening here? And he's been in a 5-minute conversation with them, telling them all about the film and talking to them about acting.
I mean, hey, he's marketing.
Exactly. He is by far our best promoter. But I think that really he really wanted to have these conversations. And, all throughout the city, he was stopping people, having conversations, talking about the film, talking about their experiences in Hartford, which again, I think helped him bring the character to life, because he, was talking to the real people that helped make the fabric of Hartford.
Well, I love that you said that, because I was just going to say, I think that really showed with Laquan playing Ricky. I think it really showed that personality that shone through in the movie. And so before this program, we mentioned earlier that we had a chance to talk to members of the cast. And we're going to be hearing from Laquan Copeland. He plays the main character in the film, Ricky Price. Laquan grew up in Columbus, Georgia, and almost immediately connected to the city of Hartford.
being from my city and connecting with Hartford, that was the most like shocking yet like warming kind of feeling that I got when we first started filming in Hartford was how similar they were to the South. It was so much richness and culture and just honestly so many nice people there that was so welcoming. But I remember TJ made it a point like right off the bat to get us involved in the community. And I remember the first day he took us around and toured Hartford, and literally we went to what was, I think you guys, is like annual jazz festival, like, and they have this big community jazz music festival, and that's when I saw the diversity, the diversity, inclusivity, the culture, and just the richness of Hartford that you all, pretty sure you all grew up with and know, but it was such a great feeling because we were like, oh man, like it really helped us embody the essence of those characters and help like build a space and a home for them. That was one of the many spaces that he took us to, from that to the Yard Goats game. Like it was so many like cultural points and like, monumental aspects that I'm pretty sure you guys get to enjoy on a yearly basis that he showed us within a month's time span. We had this kind of stereotypical, kind of concept of what we thought Hartford might be. Same thing of what people might think about Georgia or what they might think about LA. And, we don't necessarily see so much of Hartford. Granted, now, shout out to TJ, other filmmakers who are really shining a light and producing films out there. But it was such a rewarding feeling to see a city and just a community filled with so much richness, so much joy, and so much support. It was so much love and community that I will forever hold. It's like a second home for all of us now. And I think that was the best part about filming this movie.
That was the actor Laquan Copeland, who plays Ricky Price in the film Midas. So TJ, what do you have to say with what Laquan has to say? I feel he sounds like he has so much love for the city.
Yeah, and I mean, I think, again, that comes back to he really threw himself into that process, and we can present all those opportunities, and that was a really big thing for me, was wanting to give our actors the opportunity to immerse themselves in our communities. The Jazz Festival was a really fun one because that one was after a really long day of shooting. It was a Friday night. We had been shooting all day. And I said, hey, guys, like, it's been a long day. If you guys want to just go home and sleep and, talk to your people and all that kind of stuff, I totally understand. And they were like, give us like 30 minutes. We're going to go shower real fast. We'll meet you out in Bushnell Park. And we walked around and got food, bumped into various people that I knew there and kind of crashed a couple parties, which, again, I think people were so welcoming. Walked up and said, hey, here's a group of actors. They're here shooting a movie. And people are like, oh, my God, we want to talk to you. We want to share our food. We want to share a drink with you. I think that really speaks to who Hartford is as a community.
Well, and earlier we talked about loving to go see these blockbuster movies like Ocean's 11, The Italian Job. But we also want to see movies that have deepness and could inspire a lot of thoughtful conversations. And we're talking about a heist movie. So maybe that's not the first genre we think about, but you can still have these very thoughtful conversations and important themes of race and privilege. So what was your thought process like, and how were you able to sort of integrate that into the movie?
Yeah, I mean, so for me with movies, I always start with, I want to make movies that are accessible. And what I mean by that is I want to make movies that just about anybody can go to the theater and watch and enjoy and understand. Because, I love, all the Oscar movies that come out every year, but oftentimes they are movies that you have to have a film studies background or really, be paying attention to the small details in order to understand. And so for me, the holy grail of filmmaking is if you can make a movie that is accessible and entertaining, but also has something to say about the world, interrogates whether it's, wealth inequality or privilege or things like that, in this case, the health insurance industry, trying to find a way to balance those two things that hopefully audiences are walking out and going, that was a really fun movie. I really enjoyed that. But also on the ride home are thinking a little bit more about the themes that were explored in it.
Well, I think it also came out really naturally. So what was the planning like for that?
I mean, that was kind of baked into, deciding to make the mark a health insurance company, right? Some of those pieces come out naturally, the characters that you build. But then also a lot of that comes out through the characters that we have. I mean, one of the things that I really loved about our cast was, being on a feature-length set and, we're shooting for 20 days over the course of a month. They really get to know their characters well. And so there were times when they would come to me and, we had really, really in-depth conversations about the characters and also the themes of the film. And they would come to me and go, hey, I have this idea. Can we tweak this a little bit? And I think this kind of gets at who my character is a little bit more, does this. And almost all the time they were right. And there was a great adjustment to help kind of hone in on what we were trying to do.
So many behind the scenes to make those scenes happen. And we also asked actor Laquan Copeland about the themes of race and social inequality in the movie, and here's what he had to say.
I think when you talk about just the social injustices and then social justice regarding race, and then on top of that, adding the healthcare aspect and the administration part to it, it really made it a three-dimensional story with so many layers to tap into. And I remember what made TJ so special was he was about collaboration. And you hear that often throughout Hollywood and just in the entertainment industry, but it's a difference when somebody is executing that. And Claire, who's played by Lucy Powers, she was my scene partner in a lot of these scenes. She played my girlfriend in the film. And what I really enjoyed about this film is that they really got to dissect and show interracial relationships without putting it in your face. You know, it's not nothing that is shocking. It's not nothing that needed to be a focal point. You just have these two people that really cared and loved and understood each other. And honestly, we're growing to understand each other. There's one scene in particular that I can revert back to where we're in the bowling alley and Ricky kind of not chastises Claire, but explains to her about her privilege because it's something that she can't necessarily identify and see just yet. And so I love those conversations because it was in nuances within that scene where, as an audience member, you kind of get to learn from his perspective what his quote unquote privilege is not like versus what her privilege is. And I think it was done so beautifully in a way that, you know, that's all you can ever ask for as an actor, is to be represented in the right way and also portray these characters in the best way.
Well, I really love what Laquan just said, because I think that was definitely my experience as an audience, where it really just came out so naturally and organically, as we talked about earlier. And we also got to hear from Hercamille Preet Carr, who plays Sunita. And here's what she has to say about changing up what a heist film looks like.
Not only as far as like someone from my background playing a role like this in a film like this, it's also trailblazing a new path. I feel like as far as heist films go, or any type of films, you know what I mean? Like making it a lot more relatable to the everyday man and woman. Because how many times like do we joke with our friends like, oh man, like life is so hard. If I could, I would this, you know? And this is one of those scenarios where they actually go through with it, and then you kind of see how it would progress. And I feel like this is honestly a lot more relatable, and people may feel a lot more empathy and sympathy for these characters because it could be any one of us.
And TJ, can you respond to what we heard from Laquan and Preet?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I was struck by is, you know, I give a lot of credit to my schooling, and specifically I went to a magnet school my whole life. And for those that don't know, magnet schools, because the Sheffield versus O'Neill decision, have very specific racial breakdowns. And so I went to an integrated school my entire life. And I think, especially in today's day and age, where there's a lot of conversation about diversity and equity and inclusion and all those things, it was just something that naturally from, you know, the age of 4 through my graduating high school, I was in an integrated setting. And so it didn't feel like a challenge to tackle those topics in a script. Like that was just part of what my life had been. And so the diversity of our cast and the themes that were being explored in the film weren't something like new that I needed to research, that I was worried about tackling. They were something that I knew very deeply. And so I kind of was able to go in with the confidence of how we're going to talk about these themes, how we're going to explore them.
Well, it seems like improvisation and naturally seems to be the two themes of your process here. And, you know, each city has its own story of race, inequality, privilege, and diversity. How did you go about to capture that story specifically here in Hartford?
Yeah, I mean, again, Hartford has such a deep history. And for me, it kind of started with magnet schools. You know, I went to Montessori magnet and then classical magnet. And both of those schools, you know, we talked about in school, the Sheff versus O'Neill decision, how Hartford had been so racially segregated. And, you know, there's still a lot of work to be done, but slowly trying to, you know, help integrate both from people coming in from the suburbs as well as people from the city moving out to the suburbs. And I think that piece of it and figuring out how to tackle that and create a world that feels very authentic to Hartford, I think that was really what it came back to for me. Was I wanted, it all came to what's going to feel the most authentic for Hartford. And I knew, having grown up here, that to have, you know, our 3 main characters or our 4 main characters from these different backgrounds, both racial backgrounds and wealth backgrounds, was part of what Hartford is. And you see that all the time in a school like classical. You have students from all those different backgrounds sharing a lunch table, dating, having those kind of experiences. And so I was able to really tap into that.
Well, and it's so exciting to see a film filmed in Hartford and to listen to the process of a film filmed in Hartford. But it is also really exciting to find out that your film wouldn't just be shown in Hartford and Connecticut, but it's actually going to be shown across the country, in theaters across the country. What's going through your mind right now?
I mean, it's one of those things where you put so much time and energy into a project not knowing where it's going to be, right? So 2 years ago when we were filming the project, we had no idea where it was going to end up. Even a year ago, as we were finishing up post-production, we didn't know where it was going to end up. And it wasn't until last fall we went out to the American film market with the film and shopped it around and met with distributors, got some offers, picked the best one. And then that's kind of when it all kind of clicks into place. And you go, okay, we've got this contract. We know what the distribution is going to be. But even then we had to wait. Our distributor said, hey, we think that if we wait till the summer, it's a summer movie, this will be the right time to bring it out into the world. And so it is a really cool experience. We opened up in 7 cities across the country, including we had opening night was sold out in New York, LA, and of course here in Hartford. And that's a really, getting texts from friends in New York and LA saying, hey, I just saw the movie in theaters. This is such a cool moment. Was really fun. And by the end of the summer, we'll be in 20 cities across the country.
Wow.
And then streaming this fall. And so, by the end of this whole thing, audiences all around the world will be able to see this, which I think is both a cool, for me as a filmmaker to have my work on that scale is not something I necessarily could imagine, but I'm really grateful to be in that opportunity. But also, to get to expose audiences all across the world to Hartford. The hope is that eventually, whether it's this film or the next film, hopefully creating a cult classic that is bringing people in to go, I want to go visit all the locations, all the filming locations.
Oh, that is such a thing. Like the cult classic and the location scouting and location tourism, I guess. Maybe that can be your next thing. And, you've gone to some premieres of the movie too. So what has the reception been like? Yeah,
I say getting to premiere it in front of a hometown crowd. That was really when I was writing the movie and working on the movie, I wasn't picturing the getting to go to 20 cities across the country or streaming or any of that. I was really picturing the hometown premieres. And so back in October, we got to do an event at the Bushnell. That was a sold-out event in front of, I think 800 people, showing them the movie for the first time. And that's such a fun moment because, as a filmmaker, you're watching it in much smaller settings, right? And so, when we're doing the sound mix, we're sitting in kind of a theater, but there's me and the sound mixer and maybe one other person. There's 3 of us sitting in the room. And so the laughs aren't quite as big and the moments, the gasps aren't quite as big. And so to go from that, where I think the biggest audience I'd watched it with was maybe 5 people. I did like some friends and family just to get a last look at, make sure everything looked good. That was the biggest audience I'd seen it. And then we suddenly jumped to 800 people. And to be in that theater and the laughs and the gasps and everything was really, as a filmmaker, you can't really ask for much more. And it was funny. People have come back to see it a second time. Now it's playing in theaters at Real Artways. And they go, I heard more lines because that first night when it was 800 people, like the laughs, you just couldn't hear things because people were laughing over lines and things. But so having that opportunity is really great. And then getting to come and bring it back to Real Artways, where, again, my filmmaking journey started 9 years ago. I got a little emotional as we were coming up on stage for that first night. Because I realized, the very first time I'd had one of my films shown on a big screen was at that program 9 years ago in that exact theater. And so that moment and, the Q&A afterward, which was a more intimate Q&A and got to, bring in audience questions and hear how people react to the film. I think that was really the first time that I got to hear also people that I didn't know. I think that's, you as a filmmaker know that your friends and family are going to love the film and say nice things about the film. But the first time that somebody who I had never met before came up and gushed about the film, that's really fun.
Always love it when your mom says it's good, but hey, if someone else thinks so too, you're like, oh, I think I did something right. Yeah. And nothing like being in a theater and being immersed and hearing reactions, which I also think is probably the best compliment, right?
And that's one of the things, in today's theatrical age, I remember our distributor kind of asked us, hey, how important is it for you to be in theaters? And I think I said, I understand in today's theatrical age, it's harder and harder to get a film in theaters. There are less theaters. So it's not a deal breaker for us, but I really want to bring it to theaters in Hartford because I think theaters in Hartford will enjoy watching it together. And I think that's been so true of, people have come up to me afterwards and said, just the gasps as local landmarks are in and people go, oh my God, I recognize that place. Those experiences that you enjoy together in a theater, you don't get that when you're streaming it at home. And so to have that opportunity to show it in theaters here has been really cool.
I do love a good reaction when you're sitting in a theater watching a movie. And so hopefully this will encourage our listeners to go check out a movie or two this weekend. Our guest for the hour is writer and director TJ Noel-Sullivan. His new film is Midas. And coming up next, we hear about the work being done to educate future filmmakers. And if you want to see a preview for Midas, visit our website, ctpublic.org/wherewelive. And let us know if you have a question for TJ. It's worth the watch. Go check out Midas. Join the conversation, 888-720-9677, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. Today, we're hearing from writer and filmmaker TJ Noel-Sullivan. He's the director of the new movie, Midas. The heist film was produced right here in Hartford. TJ's already working on his next film, but he's also spending some time educating the next generation on the craft of filmmaking. And so, TJ, earlier we talked about The Circle, where you started in Real Artways, which is based here in Hartford, and now you're back at Real Artways, which is a nonprofit art space. And so you're teaching film and cinema there now. What does it feel like?
I mean, it's really cool to have, the high school group that I really think is going to be the next generation of me's. Earlier this week, they pitched their first short films. And afterwards, the only thing I could think about is, wow, all of these ideas are so much better than my short film in this program. So they're off to a good start. But it is really cool to, have been in that program 9 years ago and have a teaching artist who came and really gave me that spark and made me passionate about film. And actually, my teaching assistant in that program was a film student at Yale. And I talked to him about, hey, what has that experience been? And he was one of the people that helped me decide that was the right path for me. And so hoping that we can kind of be a part of building that next generation. Because for me, a really big thing as we think about the future of filmmaking in Hartford is it can't be done alone. It can't be just done by one company, And so wanting to build the infrastructure and the group of people that are really passionate about it, that are really excited about it, and are going to, build the community then upon which we can have lots of films being made here in Hartford. And so it's definitely been a different hat to try and think about how to teach film. One of my favorite things is we actually showed the Ion Video group Midas 2 days before it premiered in theaters and got to have a whole conversation about writing to your resources and writing what you know. And I think it's really fun that's going to be, the next generation that is going to be out there and making films like Midas in the future.
Well, and I think your story is certainly a great example of that. But we talked about earlier too, there is still this idea that when you're pursuing a career in media, that you have to be in a certain place. And with film and TV, you have to be in LA or New York. And it's actually a lot of paralleling with journalism too. We get told that, if you want to make it big, you have to be in these big markets. And so how are you trying to break that narrative?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so much great work being done. The Connecticut Film and Television Alliance has recently popped up and has been doing a lot of work to kind of help organize. Because I think at the end of the day, having spent some time in LA, the only real difference is, having the really robust community. And at times, the joke in LA is you bump into anybody and they either work in the industry or they want to work in the industry. And at times, that can be a little suffocating. And so sure. I appreciate that here, when I bump into people, they're from all walks of life. They have all different stories and we're all, that's kind of the material of how you create stories that are grounded is by knowing people that don't just work in your industry. But I also think that as a city and as a state, what we need to be doing is looking at how do we build sustainable pipelines because, in today's day and age, it is more and more possible to create films wherever because with Zoom and things like that, even though many of the decision makers are in New York and LA, they're funding projects all around the country, all around the world. And the other really big piece, I think, is creating a sustainable industry here that's not just focused on film, but also, commercials as an example. We have, all of our crew on Midas, we're all local crew members. The majority of them make their living from commercials and other projects like that. And so I'm very excited that one day we're going to get to the point where there's so many movies and TV shows being made here that they can just work full-time in movies and TV. But in the short term, it's about making sure that we have really great commercial projects that are shooting here that are helping create a sustainable, lifestyle for local crew members. And that also means showing to some of the different companies and agencies throughout the state that, hey, you can make it here and a Connecticut-based production company is just as good as a New York one.
Well, and you mentioned Connecticut-based companies. You're part of the Hartford Film Company. Can you tell us a bit about that and some of your next projects in the next couple of minutes?
Sure. So, the Hartford Film Company was really founded with this idea of it can be done here, and we're going to do it here. Part of the name there is we're not moving. Hartford Film Company is going to be in Hartford forever. And so, we're doing projects of all sizes. We're doing a lot of commercial projects. We're also, developing the next feature films. We got 2 narrative scripts that we'll see which one gets to go first, but we've got 2 narrative scripts that hopefully we made as early as next year, as well as some documentary projects. I think there's so many compelling stories to be told here locally, and it's really kind of an untapped world for stories. And so we're exploring all those different options, as well as trying to contribute to an overall robust ecosystem here and realizing that it can't just be the Hartford Film Company, right? There needs to be a plethora of production companies all creating really cool projects and all working together. And that's one of the things I'm really appreciative of is the film industry here is so collaborative. You meet somebody else in the industry and it's immediately like, hey, we should work together, not, oh, you might steal my client or steal something. It's people are very, very collaborative, which is really great.
And really quickly here, you mentioned ecosystem. What does your thought process change when we're also in a world where we're sort of dominated by TikTok videos with these very, very short video storytelling? How do you grapple with that?
Yeah, TikTok, I think, is such an interesting challenge that we as an industry are going to have to grapple with. I say at the end of the day, it really comes down to storytelling. And whether it's a 15-second story or a 90-minute story, storytelling is what's key. And we as audiences are really drawn to storytelling. And so we're exploring and especially as a really young company, are putting efforts and thoughts behind, hey, how can we be doing stuff in the TikTok space or, other social media spaces? Because it's a really great way to reach your audience, right?
Right.
I, as a storyteller, my most thing that really drives me is how can I tell a story that reaches the right audience? And if that audience is on TikTok, then I should be on TikTok, and there's no reason we can't tell stories there as well.
Oh, got about 30 seconds here. Any final thoughts you'd like to share with our listeners?
I'll just say the Midas was just extended for a second time, so it's going to be at Real Artways through July 18th. And so would love to have audiences check it out. I'm there a lot of times, so if you have questions for me that you weren't able to call in and ask, you can probably bump into me after the show and ask me personally.
Well, go and ask TJ some questions because he wants to answer those questions. Thank you so much, TJ Noel-Sullivan, who's a writer and director of Midas, for joining us today. Thank you, TJ, for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
And listeners, you can find out more about the film and where to see it on our website, ctpublic.org/wherewelive. I'm Catherine Shen. Today's show is produced by Tess Terrible. Our technical producer is Bradley O'Connor. Download Where We Live anytime on your favorite podcast app. Thank you so much for listening and happy movie watching.